It shapes us. And what's true for individuals is also true for organizations. Our early experiences in an organization, in a movement, shape our character, inform our future. And so we cannot talk about a future that's worth pursuing apart from our character in the past. How has God shaped us? How has God led us? What are those core values? In one sense, it's all about Jesus. Because Jesus has called us to follow him. He has called us to follow him into the prisons of the world. What does that mean? How does that inform what we do, what we have done, and what we will continue to do in the future? As we move from the past into the future, let me just offer you a brief reflection from the life of Christ. When Jesus began his ministry, it was at the Jordan River. He went to John to be baptized. And as he stepped into the waters, a voice came from heaven. And the Spirit descended on him as a dove. And the voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Similar to the affirmation in the story that Tim referred to, where Jesus went up onto the mountain with James, Peter, and John. And that happened at the Jordan initially. And I can't imagine what that was like. What a tremendous affirmation. God from heaven saying, "You're the one. I am pleased in you." And in a sense, that voice has also come to us. Because God has called us, each one of us. And there is pleasure in that call. I am pleased with you. I am pleased to call you into my service. I am pleased to call you to be my representative in the prisons of Russia, in the prisons of Estonia, in the prisons of Holland, even the Netherlands, Germany, and so forth. Then what happens next? The Spirit comes on Jesus, and then we read that the Spirit leads Jesus into the wilderness. Wow, what a letdown. No sooner does God's call come to Jesus, God's affirmation come to Jesus, then the Spirit takes him to a desolate place. That's not what you expect. You think that when God's call comes, the way is open. Everything is good now. We're going to move into a very bright and prosperous future. But that's not always what happens. And I know there are stories in here. I'm always reminded of Hans's story. That when God called Hans into prison ministry, the Spirit led him through some very, very difficult times of desolation, a wilderness beyond description, where survival didn't look possible, right? And sometimes God's call to us comes at a moment in time, and we move into the future, and that future is difficult. Wilderness is always a place of deprivation, of difficulty, of challenge. And that may happen to some of us as we move from here to where we are yet to be. And when Jesus was in temptation, or when Jesus was in the wilderness, the temptations came to him. Because when you're in a place of difficulty, when you're in a place of deprivation, you get hungry for something, right? You hunger for something. You need something. Somebody help me, please. I need sustenance. I need something to see me through this time of difficulty. And some people grasp at straws, at false promises and false hope. And some of that came to Jesus. He was tempted to turn stones into bread. Understand that, because some of us wish we could turn stones into money so that we could support ourselves or support the ministry. But it's this idea of looking to the wrong things to answer the deficiency that you feel. The temptation was not about making bread out of stones. The temptation was one of depending on Jesus' own abilities instead of God's provision. And I think sometimes organizations fall into great difficulty when they try to solve their own problems instead of depending on God. We try to solve our own problems with human wisdom, human ingenuity, human tactics, and human strategy that have nothing to do with God's provision. So as we move through our own wilderness, we have to depend on God to provide. And I know Gabriela has experienced that in the Czech Republic as well. How will God provide? When the cupboards are bare and the bank account is empty, how will God provide? Temptation is always to start taking things into our own hands, to take matters into our own hands. After all, hasn't God given us a brain to think with? Hasn't He given us ability? So why don't we just do for ourselves what God doesn't seem to be doing? Instead of waiting, instead of continuing the journey through the wilderness. And of course we think of that during this Lenten experience particularly. And then there's the temptation of the steeple. He's taken up into the steeple, and the temptation is throw yourself down from the steeple and everyone will be amazed at what you're doing. You will be honored, you'll be revered, you will be somebody. And then things will become easy. I think in our modern day context, it's the temptation of marketing. Branding. If we can just get ourselves visible enough, things will begin to happen. But again, isn't that a way of taking things into your own hands? Not to say that marketing isn't important, of course it is. But it depends where you put your ultimate trust. Is your trust in God, or is your trust in marketing? Simple as that. And then there's the final temptation where, again, and I guess this just is another reiteration of more of the same, where Satan said, just kind of bow down to me. Just give me a little curtsy and all of this stuff will be yours. Always a temptation to make a little compromise. We're looking at metrics of success. And so you compromise a little bit to achieve that measure of success. And certainly if Jesus had done that, he would have been eminently successful, because the devil told him all of the nations of the world he would have the allegiance of all of the nations of the world. Talk about a metric of success. But again, that's not where it's at. It's a temptation. And so for 40 days, Jesus endured temptation after temptation. Things that would have deviated him from his calling. Mission